Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Samantha Hewitt, and I am the Senior Manager of Growth Marketing here at Telgorithm. Today, we are talking all about 10DLC registration. You can see a few of the topics that we have coming up on this slide, but we really do intend for this to be a super conversational Q&A. And lucky enough for us, we have two extremely experienced and knowledgeable members of our industry to have this conversation, starting with our very own CEO and co-founder of Telgorithm, Aaron Alter. And we are also joined by a very special guest, Stefan Heller. Stefan is the Vice President of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships with the Campaign Registry, which means we're literally having a conversation about registration with the source. So we're extremely excited. Thank you both for being here. Aaron, I'm going to pass it over to you. You can give us a personal intro and have Stefan do the same, and then you guys can just get into it.
For sure. First of all, thanks so much, Samantha, for putting in all the work to get this all together. A lot goes on behind the scenes to make this happen, and it's super appreciated, and we're super excited. That said, first of all, thanks everyone for joining. Whether you're joining today or you're going to be joining in the future, we really appreciate that. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Aaron Alter, CEO and co-founder here at Telgorithm. Telgorithm is kind of what we'll call in the spectrum, is a newer company. But one of the primary reasons we founded Telgorithm was to provide more transparency, cut through kind of the red tape, and kind of get to the actual source wherever we can to give you, our customer, and the businesses the right and proper information and kind of cut through that noise. And I'm super proud to be able to, as one of our first steps here, to be able to have my friend Stefan, the Vice President of the actual Campaign Registry, join us today for your viewing and per your guys' request, so that we can kind of start and create a layer of understanding what the truth is, what the facts are, and what's not. And that being said, it is my true pleasure and honor to intro you, Stefan. If you would briefly give our audience a brief intro of yourself.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. Myself, I have been in the messaging space for many years. I was most recently at Open Market, which is now Infobit, and I was there for approximately 8.5 years as the Director of Carrier Relations for North America. Recently moved to the Campaign Registry. I say recently, I mean 3 years, nearly 3 years goes past very fast when you're developing a new product based on carrier requirements. So I've been here at the Campaign Registry since just about the beginning. And I am looking forward to this discussion and this chat, and hopefully able to give more insights and more perceived ideas about what the Campaign Registry is and what it isn't, so that people can use it correctly and have a great experience with 10DLC.
Awesome. And again, super thankful for you taking the time. Let's jump right into it, Stefan. So first of all, I'm going to start with something very basic, and that is for anyone that's wondering, what is A2P 10DLC? How would, from a Campaign Registry perspective, how would you describe that to a business?
Right. So 10DLC, we love acronyms in this space, and 10DLC stands for 10-digit long codes. I don't say we have really, really, really smart acronyms, but they kind of does what it does what it says in the box. So 10-digit long codes are really the sanctioned version of long codes. For many, many years, people were sending traffic with utilizing long codes, sending business messaging, A2P messaging, utilizing long codes to the carriers' networks here in the US. And that really was unsanctioned traffic. And people were using multiple different ways to have their traffic, their business traffic, be perceived as P2P traffic, so that it would pass the filtering that the carriers were trying to put into their networks to protect their consumers from unwanted spam and phishing. So with the delivery in the market of 10DLC, it's a sanctioned messaging A2P entity type that is supported by the carriers. And this means that for an exchange of transparency about what the brand is, what you are doing in the network, what campaigns you are running, the carriers will support that messaging through their networks. Of course, as long as you are doing compliant messaging, there's no point sort of setting up and trying to do some spam messaging and go, oh, look, I got shut down. That's going to happen.
For sure. So would you say that, look, when everyone refers to P2P, a lot of people call it peer-to-peer, when it's really person-to-person, was that protocol was never intended to be used for business to consumer interaction and messaging. And simply when that protocol was initially created, there was no internet or cloud communications like there is today. And therefore, just kind of by default, once cloud communication and cloud communication API providers came into existence, which is super beneficial for the right reasons, there was no other path. So essentially by default, like everyone reads a text message, nothing to download, nothing to install. This makes sense. But then to your point, as you mentioned, over time, the byway for this protocol was never meant for businesses, meaning higher throughputs. And then as over time went on, people started kind of to take advantage, like with anything else. And so therefore, if I'm understanding, repeating this back correctly, that's kind of what led to kind of this A2P 10DLC carriers and network operators realizing there are legitimate businesses, the proper path and protocol is not the original protocol. And therefore we need to create this new protocol. And then this is more where you guys come in. We also need to, if we're going to do that, we want to make sure that we're able to kind of, monitor, regulate that, make sure that if we're going to open up the spigot, that, it's going to be used properly. And that's kind of what I'm hearing as far as where the campaign registry, which is actually my next question, about why was the campaign registry even created and how did it even come about?
Sure. You're absolutely right with the summary that you gave there, Aaron. And the other thing, you touched on it briefly, but the throughput rate on P2P was only 1 TPS. And that, of course, was very indicative of the fact that it was only meant for individuals texting an individual. It was you texting me and me texting you. It was not meant to be used from a scalable perspective to send business messaging, to really get bulk messaging, wholesale messaging out there. So yes, I mean, a lot of the balance that's been changed within 10DLC has been this idea that you don't need multiple numbers to get the throughput that you need to send your messaging. You can utilize a single number, and that single number potentially has the ability to give you the throughput to send what you need to send from a business perspective to enable those end users to get the messaging entitled that they have asked for and are looking to receive. So your question, following question was, what is the campaign registry? How did it come about? So the campaign registry, or TCR as another acronym we like to throw in there, the campaign registry came about from the requirements the carriers were building out to understand how they could register the traffic that was going to be seen going across their networks. And so they looked at what they needed to register. And each carrier, in many cases, had a slightly different set of requirements. And what we tried to do from the campaign registry's perspective is to gather all of those requirements and create synergy between the respective carriers so that we had a low friction input process for registering. How successful was that? It was kind of okay. I would say that probably it's a shame that we didn't have more synergy, because there definitely would have been a little less friction. But I think that we did a very good job at getting as much commonalities agreed between the carriers so that there was an understanding that they don't, a person entering the data isn't having to enter it 2, 3, 4 times. They're really entering it once. But there were certainly some different hoops that had to be jumped through for certain carriers, and certain kinds of messaging needed to be reviewed by one carrier, maybe not needed to be reviewed by another carrier. So we had all of these requirements, and we're trying to build out something that was going to be an effortless process on every side of the equation. And trying to please everybody means that sometimes you end up not pleasing some people. So
Totally.
tried our best, right, to get something so that it worked. The problem that we were facing is that you were coming from a place where people that were utilizing long codes didn't really have to register anything apart from asking for a phone number, a number that they were going to be using to send their messaging on, and then sending their messaging. So this whole concept of you need to tell somebody what you're doing was not ingrained within the long code market. It was very much ingrained in the short code market. So people that were using both short code and long code, the people that could move, they would say, oh yes, this makes a lot of sense. We're already asking for this information on short code. So using it in long code, done deal, easy, straightforward. We understand what you're asking for and how to do it. Long code, which obviously the people moving from long code to 10DLC constituted probably the larger proportion. There was definitely a learning curve, a very large learning curve for them to understand why were all these hurdles suddenly being thrown in front of them, because that's what it was perceived as. You've suddenly put all these hurdles in front. And there was an element of needed friction because nobody really knew what was running across. The carriers did not know maybe in detail what was running across their networks. They knew when something bad happened and they would slap it down. But in many cases, you kind of were playing a little game of whack-a-mole. And so with the registry as a reputation authority for business messaging on 10DLC, that's what we like to say. It's a nice little phrase there. We tried to ensure that we have a commonality of information gathered about the brand. This is the company that you as a CSP, a campaign service provider, is the person that you have a contract with. They want to send messaging through your platform. So you put this information for the brand into the registry. And there's some critical pieces of information because we need to know that this brand really is a brand. It's not just, Aaron and Stefan's cool little idea that we just thought up overnight. Then we're going, yeah, we should just make this work. It's actually a legitimate business. And to do that, we have to actually ask for some critical information. And we have to check that that's actually it really registered correctly. So then on top of that, once you've created that brand information, you can then go on and say, and these are the campaigns that this brand does. And within that, we're then also gathering further pieces of information. And this is a refinement process. Where we started a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, has definitely moved as we've realized there are certain other critical pieces of information that are needed. So there is definitely a little bit of a revamp, a revision of what is being asked for, what is being gathered, because some of the details or some more details are needed so that usually if something is looking a little strange, the carrier can look into their M&O portal and look at the information that was input originally and look at it and say, how much does this marry up to what I'm seeing actually in my network? Because if A equals A, fantastic. If A equals Y, there's something amiss here. Somebody either has done something wrong, not always deliberately, but maybe deliberately. And so you need to sort of check it. But so the campaign registry came about to really give this information to the carriers to understand what was running across their network so that they could know sort of who were the good actors in this space, who were the people that really were trying hard to grow their business, to create good communications, and also to ensure that we're keeping this SMS environment as clean as possible, because nobody wants this to go like email. That's the last thing anybody wants. You want it clean. And so people that are abusing this environment, I think everybody who is there wanting to ensure good, clean messaging, wants those people or wants those brands or wants those fictitious brands out of the equation, because it just muddies the water, it confuses the consumer, and you want to make sure the consumer can trust when they get an SMS message that they are actually getting something that has value, and you don't want it devalued. So everything that the registry was created to do was in essence to try and ensure that the carriers know what is running across their network, that the CSPs, the campaign service providers that are having these direct contracts, or they have contracts with resellers, are ensuring that they're getting quality of information that they really can trust, that the deal they've done with this company who says that they've got a deal with Joe Brand that really is Joe brand, that they really can trust that they got a good contract, it's good messaging, and nobody, the cost of actually having a bad actor on your books is huge, because
Totally.
the time and trouble to bring somebody on board, to integrate them, to have them, go through all your account management processes, and then they send bad messaging. You just don't want to. It's a nightmare to sort of have to deal with, and not only because it harms the CSP's reputation, and that's something that any CSP should be looking at and saying, they want their reputation to be impeccable.
Awesome. So just to expand on that a bit further, so we deal with a lot of customers and the industry as a whole of even till today, right? So you were able to register, as far as I'm aware, back, and it was voluntary back then, back in, we'll say September of 2020, right? We're now in literally 2 years later. And I don't know the exact metrics, and you could correct me if I have this off, but I would say that maybe, I think the last year this is about a month ago, maybe about 1 million total brands are registered, but in the wide landscape of what we'll call folks that use a local phone number that's still on P2P, I would say, and again, you could correct me if I'm off here, much more traffic on local numbers is still unregistered than is registered. Is it safe to say that at this point in time? And that
yeah, I would say we've not rounded the corner to say the majority have been registered. Not yet. There is a rapidity to the registration. We are seeing more and more people registering. And we're trying to create an encouragement process to do this, and constantly looking for people to come back to us on, if our documentation needs improving, if there are use cases that we're not covering off, because, you can't account for everything. And there's some really amazing use cases out there. And we're like, wait, this really is a square peg in a round hole. How do we solve for this?
Totally.
So we try wherever possible to ensure that we're developing answers and developing solutions to problems. And we need feedback to do that, because otherwise we're kind of developing in a vacuum, which is a terrible thing to do, which we don't do. We try not to do. We always try and reflect what we're being asked to do. And we have a lot of conversations with a lot of the tier 1 CSPs. And that's not saying that we don't need the information from the tier 2s and tier 3s and tier 4s, all the people down the chain. But we have to start somewhere. If we had a meeting with, we have 700 CSPs that are signed to the registry at this point. Mm-hmm. That's not a meeting. That's like crowd control. And we need to refine it down to the ones that, yes, they're at the very upper echelons of size. They're the larger ones out there, and we're hoping that they're getting the information and the feedback from everybody below them, the resellers that they work with, to be able to feed input back to us. But I would highly recommend that if anyone has suggestions or wants to contact us, they should. I mean, we will talk with everybody and let them know if somebody says, oh, we've noticed that we can't do X, Y, and Z. And we're like, oh no, that is on our roadmap. We've already taken that into account. Somebody else has brought it up, and it's due for attention, in early part of 2023 or late part of 2022 or whatever it is. So I think the encouragement here is talk to us. Let us know if you feel there is a problem or you perceive there is an issue, because we want to ensure that we're the right side of positive.
Awesome. And just to even expand even further, so a lot of the feedback we get many times, even to now, is, well, I don't want to register. This just sounds way too complicated. I got to give brands and campaigns and all this stuff. You know what? I did see that I'm being charged more money, maybe 4X or 3X, whatever it is, from being unregistered. You know what? At this point, it's my core business. I'm okay with that, as long as the messages still get through. And what's kind of even coaxed or allowed for that to happen is there are some, we'll call them aggregators, that still allow unregistered traffic. Some don't. Some cut it off completely from their end. And so therefore, you can't send the message at all unless you're registered. But there are still many, meaning aggregator or providers or DCAs, that still allow unregistered traffic through. So what would you say to a business that currently is using a provider that's still allowing you to send unregistered traffic, and you're okay with saying, look, I don't mind paying whatever it is, 4x fees, it's worth it for me to send this. What would the campaign registry say to such a business on why they should still go ahead and what the benefit for them in registering would be?
Registering means that you take away a little bit of the unknown from your messaging termination rates, as in the termination rate you get for terminating messaging into the carrier's networks. When you're running unregistered, and you're right, you can run unregistered. There's nothing preventing you from running unregistered. There are fewer and fewer avenues that will allow you to do that. There are more and more DCAs, or direct connect aggregators, another acronym, but there are many DCAs that, you're right, do not accept that kind of traffic anymore, because they see it as more of a liability and a risk that they are willing to take, because it affects their potential connection that they have to the carriers. And why would you increase your liability at potentially having that connection questioned by the carriers if you're suddenly sending huge amounts of unregistered traffic? That aside, when you're looking at the traffic that you're doing, and if you're still getting the same termination rates that you were before 10DLC was initiated, and in some cases, you could go on for another year and still continue to get your traffic terminated in a fashion that works for you. You know, maybe you get a few things blocked, a few things dropped, but for the most part, you're happy still with the termination rate. And I could see that could continue for a little bit. But at some point, it is going to get more and more awkward. You're going to find more and more blocks coming in, more and more algorithms used to find traffic that shouldn't be running, actually affecting the traffic that you have in unregistered and potentially blocking it or stopping it in some way. And the fact of the matter is, the carriers can turn around, hand on heart, and say, we have a sanctioned path for you to go down. If you have true business traffic and you want to ensure that your customers are getting the traffic, we have a way of you doing it. Does it cost more? Yes. Then it costs more than, it'll cost less than unregistered.
Sure.
Is it painful to do? Is there more things that you have to gather? Is there more information that you need to get? Yes, there is. And it is built on the fact that if you have this information to hand, then you truly already know your customer. So you should be happy to put this information in. If you don't have it and you don't want to go and get it, how well do you know your customer? How well should you be treated if you have little to no idea who your customer is, if they're actually a business, if they actually have a good standing in the business community of sending good and worthwhile traffic? How much should anyone trust you? I mean, in the words of one of the carriers that we deal with, never trust, always verify. And that's what the registry does. We validate and verify information through third-party organizations to ensure that we can, hand on heart, saying we've done these checks, and from what we have seen and what we have checked, these businesses are these businesses. Anyone that is signing any business as an aggregator, as a CSP, as a campaign service provider, you should be doing minimum checks, not just looking at the payout you're going to get, but you should be saying, okay, this company says they're going to do 50,000 messages a month. Great, that's fantastic. Before you sign the contract, it's like, well, has anybody done some sort of background checks on this company? And there's a lot of people there. And I mean, I'm sure you and I know how it goes. There's a lot of people that don't. They look at the dollar sign at the end and say, how quickly can we get these people onboarded? And that is the kind of scenario where, sure, you can run unregistered.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you should be knowing more about your customer than anybody else. And if you know your customer, the data and information you're gathering is exactly what we need to put into the registry.
Awesome. One point I'll actually bring up that's actually quite interesting is we hear sometimes from folks that are not registered that say, oh, we checked our deliverability and it's perfect. And then I ask them, well, how do you know? And like, oh, because we look at our logs and we see that it shows delivered. So I always say, you ever heard of this concept called a false DLR? Like, no, what's that? Well, just to describe it briefly to anyone that's watching today, because there's been a lot of, spam going on and, the network operators had to shift a little bit and filter this out, right? So initially it started with Verizon. I'm just going to pick them out of the hat arbitrarily. Verizon saying, hey, this is spam, shows you a block. But if I'm trying to get around it or trying to get something through, if I know that it was blocked, I'm going to try again. But if I think it was delivered, right, then it was delivered, I'm not going to try again. So they created this concept of false DLRs. But I'm pretty sure that's affecting real traffic too, right? Something that's maybe borderline or that could be getting caught up in that. So I would ask you, but is it safe to say that just because your provider may be showing you a delivery receipt and you're still on P2P, like, oh, my deliverability is perfect, does that necessarily mean that you're having 100% or 99% deliverability? There's still a chance you should further look into that.
Yeah, you should. In 10DLC, not all carriers deliver the same kind of delivery receipts. That's the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
There are, what people do seem to forget, the common delivery receipt within the long code space, within 10DLC, is a system delivery receipt. In other words, the carrier's system have received your message. Thank you very much. Doesn't mean to say that the end user has. Right. Doesn't mean to say it's gone to the handset successfully. In shortcode, you have handset delivery receipts. Those are delivery receipts you can count on. Yes, your message was delivered to the handset. Within 10DLC, there are situations where it will be called a delivery receipt, but it's a system delivery receipt. It only means that it's received by the carrier's systems. For other scenarios, like you say, Aaron, it could be just a false delivery receipt. There are different situations happening with different carriers where they are looking to move towards delivering handset delivery receipts.
Sure.
And in some cases, that has been rolled out in some carriers' networks. But in others, you're only getting system receipts.
For sure. So it's that meaning to say, to sum up here, that just because you say, oh, I'm seeing perfect deliverability, and there's other ways you could verify that, with like a click-through rate link, or you could send yourself a test message, but just to organically say, I'm not registered, I'm not going to go through this process because I see 100% deliverability, you may have a flaw in the logic that you're using, is kind of what I'm highlighting. You should definitely check into that. While it is possible, it's also possible not to be the case. Wanted to move on a little bit to the benefits is when you do register, because the network operators know who you are, like you said, they vet you, they know what to expect. They're essentially removing throughout the registration process and ecosystem, they know who you are. So essentially removing a lot of the filters because they know who you are. So you're going to, by default, get much better deliverability. And the whole other side of it, the other pro is additional throughputs. Like you mentioned, 60 text messages per second was really per minute was really the default on P2P, because that's all it was meant for. I always say, I don't know how good you are at typing with your fingers, but I don't know anyone that could type out 60 text messages by hand in 1 minute. And even if you could, I doubt you can conversate with someone in that way. So they really set that high, right? So from that perspective, it's high. But if you're a business and it's, Black Friday is coming up and you want to do some promotion to millions of end users, it's going to take you 10 years to get all the messages across. So the other benefit is, right, in the past, people are like, oh, one number gets me X amount of throughput. I'm going to procure hundreds of thousands of numbers, and then I start to rotate them, and it gets into this whole tricky nightmare. And you know what I'm referring to, and many folks here today know what I'm referring to. So the other benefit in this registry is because now that the network operators know your use cases, you get a much higher throughput based on your use case and who you are, right? Whether you call it you're vetted, or there's a scoring system, if you're going through added vetting, whatever it is, you can get much higher tiers. You can even get, in some cases, special business reviews, like from T-Mobile, you can get unlimited stuff. So you're getting a much higher throughput. And the idea is you're literally paying for that. Because people are like, what am I paying for? I have all these pass-through fees, and then it's either $2 or $10 for a campaign, and that's a monthly, and then there's a cost per brand and all this stuff. But really what it is that you're paying for is two things: better deliverability, because you're going on a sanctioned path. And the other one is higher throughput. And speaking of higher throughput, right, is really, if you look at the main network operators, at least the ones that we're aware of that partner today, it's really three different layers. You got your Verizon and US Cellular that still do it at a phone number level. You have AT&T that does it at this thing called a campaign level, which for those listening means a use case, right? Two-factor authentication is a use case, or, alerting a customer about something else, another use case, right? Or you have T-Mobile doing it at this brand level. So no matter how many use cases you have another brand, you have that there. And the kind of what I wanted to get, kind of just hear a little bit of your feedback on is, right? So if I'm one brand and I create a X campaign, the allotment that I'm going to get from AT&T and from T-Mobile and from Verizon could be different for each one within a single campaign. Is that correct?
Essentially, yes. There are different levels of throughput there are slight differences. The key thing here is that, as you said, compared to what was happening within long codes, unsanctioned long code A2P traffic, you are able to utilize a single number. So if you were using 10,000 numbers before to get your throughput, you now can use one. Maybe you have a backup number, but let's just say you have one number. That one number enables you to get the throughput that you need to be able to operate effectively. So I don't know. I mean, Aaron, I don't know if we should necessarily go into all of the intricacies of pricing, but, a single number has a value to it that people will charge out. Yep. Multiply that by 10,000, that is your monthly saving, potentially, if you're using 10,000 numbers, right? Of course, the people issuing numbers would be like, my God, you're taking some of our business away. But the whole point is that people will be able to feel that they don't have to go through all of this number rotation and trying to replace numbers as they were kind of being overused. And you get to that scenario where businesses can almost start to look at a local 10-digit number as identifying with them. Like you do with a short code. You get a short code and it identifies with you because you've paid a monthly fee to lease that short code. But with a number, you're paying also a monthly fee. It's on a lease basis. But You're getting this number, and you can start to say, well, actually, this number identifies with us. We actually like this number. It's ideal for us. It's, maybe it's a Chicago number, and that Chicago number, that's our headquarters, and that's where we want to be known as a strong Chicago company. That's really key. And I think when you look at throughput, and when people are looking at throughput, where they should be looking for guidance are from companies such as yourselves, Aaron, with Telgorithm, because when you're looking at what you can do, you need to go to your CSP as a brand and go, this is how we send messaging. This is how it breaks down in terms of, or this is how we think it breaks down in terms of where our demographics are based on each of the carriers. So we think maybe we're sending equally to each carrier. Maybe we're sending 75% AT&T. And so when people understand that how their messaging split can help a CSP to be very effective at guiding them to the best possible way of ensuring that they get maximum throughput for their needs. And not necessarily because, if people say, I can go through a special business review at T-Mobile and it gets me X, you may not need to. That's the whole thing. You may not need to go through the admin of that and the time in that to get what you need. It could be you can say, actually, as long as we get a reasonable vetting score that gets us into this level with T-Mobile, we've got what we need. And with AT&T, maybe we need to do something else there to really push to get a higher throughput. So it's really just people have in the past just looked at, we just need one throughput. With the way the carriers are working now, the CSPs understand what each carrier does and how they do it, And it's working with the CSPs really closely so that you really get the best choices and the best options by working with somebody that understands that market.
Sure. That's awesome. So if I have, is within a given campaign, if I have AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile, it's possible within a single campaign that AT&T, if I add it up, right, one is still at brand level with T-Mobile and campaign level with AT&T. But if you add them together, like you max out, how many messages per minute or per second on AT&T does that equal to per day, which is the daily limit across all campaigns on T-Mobile? There's possible there could be variation here. And what I'm getting at is it's important to know, like, for instance, T-Mobile says as a brand, no matter how many campaigns, you get 200,000 messages a day. Is it safe to say that without knowing in advance to sending a message, that the person you're sending a message to, the end user, is their provider is T-Mobile or subsidiary, right? You need to track that somehow because you could potentially exceed that limit. Is it safe to say that?
It is. It is. It's really about understanding who you're sending your messages to. If you're just blasting out messaging to a list of numbers that have correctly opted in, we're talking about compliant messaging here. So these people have said, yes, please send me the messages. And then you just send the messages willy-nilly without understanding where it's going. That's, again, working with your CSP. All of the CSPs have the ability to do lookups, to understand where that number belongs, right? Is that number a T-Mobile number? It could be in your customer's database. They're saying, oh, this is an AT&T customer. Maybe they've done some checks. Maybe it was done 3 months ago. They say, oh yeah, no, our list is pretty up to date. We know everybody, and we're going to work with you, but we've already done a lot of the hard work. We don't need your customer lookup process. We don't need the number lookup.
Right.
But the thing is that people port all the time. People move from carrier to carrier, and it's really important to be able to understand, is this person still a T-Mobile subscriber? Because one of the failures you get is the fact that you're trying to send to a network where the number no longer belongs, and you have to. All it needs is a simple lookup, which does not take long. There is, it's not a TCR cost, but in terms of CSP cost for a number lookup, there is a cost for that number lookup, but it means that you can correctly, not only do you update the customer's database of like, hey, you said that was an AT&T number, it isn't, it's a T-Mobile number actually now. So FYI, we have updated your list. But it also means that they're going to correctly terminate first time around, as opposed to have that failure. And when people see failure, without getting into the detail, they just sort of go, oh my God, we've got 30% failed. If 20% is that due, if 10 or 15% is due to the fact that number lookups were all over the place and it hadn't been clarified correctly, then it can lead, people will jump at the wrong conclusion. Oh, 10DLC is not working. No, it's not. It isn't working. Your database needs some cleanup.
For sure. But it's definitely safe to say that if I have 200,000, if one of my customers has, right, I'm a campaign service provider, and we're going to get to that in a second. But if I'm a campaign service provider and one of my brands has in a given campaign level, they have 200,000 messages a day with to T-Mobile, right? Because AT&T is another account, right? So is it safe to say that if either me, the customer, the brand, is not using some lookup tool in advance to sending the message, or the aggregator or the provider I'm using is not doing that lookup either, as I continue to scale, and I want to take full advantage of that 200,000 messages that I paid to have, right? Is it safe to say that likely if they're lift the ceiling on T-Mobile, which many aggregators have done, it's likely I may exceed that even within realm, not on purpose, because I'm just relying on my vendor to thinking, oh, they're not going to allow it. And if they don't, that could lead to a suspension and goes down a path.
Not so much a suspension. You just have messages fall on the floor, which
or that
in some cases is almost worse. It's your messages did not deliver at all.
Right.
And it wasn't because it was bad. It's because you hit a cap for the day. And now all those ones that fell on the floor, we're going to have to deliver tomorrow, hopefully, because and those numbers still are T-Mobile numbers. So I think people should be taking advantage of any and all tools to ensure that they're getting correct termination. Because at the end of the day, you look at any brand is going to be looking at ROI, and when they're spending a bunch of money in trying to ensure that their messaging gets to the right people. They've got people who have said, send me your marketing information, send me your whatever it is. Yes, I want my 2FA. Mm-hmm. If at the end of the day, the thing that's failing is the fact that you haven't used the tool to do the simplest thing, which is just to check the number is on that network, it baffles me if people don't. And I get it that people maybe have very lean operations and they're trying to get incredibly lean, and every fraction of a penny has an impact on the bottom line. But there's certain things that you should be prioritizing. And if you can ensure that the message is going to terminate correctly and the cost can be built into your margin, then you should be doing it. And you definitely should be doing it, because especially where you've got daily caps, you need to ensure that you are focusing on making sure that every single one of those messages is going to terminate correctly. And if you know that you've got 400,000 messages to deliver, then you can sequence it and say, okay, we're going to deliver X number today, X number tomorrow. And it's no big deal, and you can even prioritize area codes. You can, there's lots of things that you can do to ensure that the key people that need to get those messages do get those messages. Yeah,
right.
I agree with you.
Exactly. And one of the other points is we've noticed is, again, this is just industry wide in general. Again, everyone is learning how to, properly kind of come up to speed with all these new changes. We notice that many providers are capping, right? So they'll look at AT&T. So they'll say one brand has 5 different campaigns on AT&T. What they'll look at is at the lowest one, because they're not necessarily doing the lookup. Maybe they're expecting the brand to do the lookup and then may not be aware of how to do it. So what they don't want someone to get, suspend, their message not delivered. So they'll cap you. But then that's kind of not fair, because I may have spent $40 on added vetting to get higher throughputs. My highest campaign is getting this high throughput, but I'm being capped at the lower level by my provider because they want to make sure that I don't exceed the throughput for non-deliverability versus getting the actual throughputs that I am approved by the network operator, by AT&T, for example, and paid to have. And so that wouldn't be the right path either. And the bottom line, and again, this is where we want to clarify, is really the ideal way is if I get an approval from the campaign registry, the only improper way that you can ensure that you're not going lower than what you should be getting or even going above is to actually have a system in place, to your point, where you're looking up prior to sending the message and making sure who that end user network operator is to make sure that messages are being delivered accordingly. I wanted to move on to another kind of point of that I think has some confusion. So there's different personas within the ecosystem of the campaign registry. There's something called a reseller. There's something called a campaign service provider. There's something called a connectivity partner. There's something called a DCA. It's very confusing for me. I don't know where to begin. Am I a reseller? Am I a brand? What's going on over here? But really what I wanted to focus on to start is, what is the difference between, from a campaign registry standpoint, between a reseller, a campaign service provider, and a CNP or a connectivity partner?
Right. And I just realized the only element in there that we didn't really take down to a 3-letter acronym was reseller.
RSLR.
Actually, if you look at some of the CSPs out there, they actually will state that a reseller is an ISV. So there is actually a 3-letter. Yes. There is a 3-letter acronym for it. One thing I just wanted to clarify as well, Aaron, just so that because there's a couple of things that you stated in kind of your summarization in the last point.
Sure.
You said that, if the registry gives an approval. The registry doesn't give approvals. The registry confirms registration. So we are not a body that approves your messaging. We're not approving that your messaging is correct. I know it's a small point to bring up, but it's very critical so that people don't get the wrong idea here. The registry is not approving your messaging. We're not looking at your brand registration information and your campaign registration information and stating, oh, you're approved to do messaging. We're saying you have correctly registered your brand and campaign information to allow you to now send compliant messaging to the carrier's networks. However, if you send non-compliant messaging or your messaging is in any way deemed unfit or there was something wrong with it, the carriers will block, stop, suspend, and do what they need to do to protect their network and their subscribers. So the registry doesn't approve, it registers. Just wanted to
would you say that's a really good point, actually, that you're making there, because people are spending this money, they want to understand what that process is. Would you say that because, for instance, T-Mobile has binds built against the registry, when you hit a submit button, whether you're doing it to the TCR portal or whatever it is, that it's running a query, that there's a bind built with T-Mobile, and that T-Mobile has a logic that's saying, hey, this looks about right, we're going to approve this, and this is the allotment. So in other words, who's the approval coming from if it's not the TCR?
Sure. The approval is actually coming through one other acronym, which I bring up, is the DCAs, the Direct Connect Aggregators. They are the 8 to 10 aggregators in the US who have direct contracts with the carriers. And at one time or another, whichever path you go through, you will end up at one of these companies. Now, the idea is that everybody should really be checking the information that they're getting and really making sure that they feel happy with that messaging running on their own network. So you're going to check it from your perspective. Is this customer good? Are they doing the right thing? Is the messaging compliant? Yes. You're going to then send it up the chain. Now, somebody who gets it should also be looking at it and checking it and going, well, it looks right, but let's do a few other checks that we normally do on things. Okay, that looks kosher, send it up the chain. When it gets to the DCA, by virtue of the fact that their reputation, their revenue relies on the fact that they have this connection to the carriers, they really are and should be the last bastion. They're the ones that are sort of sitting there going, if we smell anything that's just a little bit out of whack, we're going to stop it before it gets to the carrier's network. Push down and push back on everybody and say, hey, we know you said blah, 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 but we don't see it when we go to the website. So why is it not there? Or why is the terms and conditions hidden? Or why is there this weird thing on the web page that would seem to indicate that you're not really doing what you say you're doing in the call to action? So they will do those things to protect their reputation, protect the carrier's network, because that is part of their role. That's part of their job. And it's their responsibility to ensure that when they finally send the messaging on, that they have done all those checks. So that is really where the approvals will come from. It should be everybody in the chain, in all honesty. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, where it's really going to fall, whose shoulders is it going to fall on? It's going to fall on these DCAs. Now, the carriers will also have systems in place to look and check and do sniff tests, and they get feedback from obviously their customer base, who is, saying, the mass amount of stops. Obviously, they go, wait, what's happening here? We need to look at this. And they've got spam organizations, spam companies they work with who are running algorithms to just make sure there's no bad actors, or if there may be trigger words that are coming up and they're catching all this stuff. But even the DCAs have this imposed in their systems as well. So at the end of the day, DCAs, Aaron, that's where the approvals should be coming from. But everybody is sort of trying to make everybody else take a similar stance. It's like, check what's running on your network. If you think it smells wrong, don't just pass it to me. Stop it and ask questions. Because at the end of the day, if everybody did that, then by the time the DCA would get it, they'd almost be looking at it going, this is fantastic. We've had one or two other organizations check it over. It looks and smells great. It's fantastic. We've checked a few things out. We've gone to the website. We've checked the stop works and whatever they've had to do. We're happy with making this go forwards. And it builds up a level of a reputational level of approval that they feel more comfortable with certain companies because they feel that they're going above and beyond to ensure that they're running compliant messaging. Anyway, awesome. I know that you asked the question, Aaron, which was reseller versus campaign service provider.
Yes, versus CNP.
CNP, which is connectivity partner.
Right.
Just in case anybody wondering how the hell did we get to CNP? So a campaign service provider is a company that has a platform that is designed and built to send messages on behalf of a brand. And so a brand will contract with a campaign service provider. They'll come to a campaign service provider and say, we want to send this awesome messaging to our people, people that love our product, and this is what we want to do. And that campaign service provider will put them under contract, and they will have commercial terms, and they will do some sort of technical integration into their platform, and that platform then is set up to send messaging. Now, the campaign service provider will work either with another campaign service provider or with a DCA. However, in TCR's world, when they are going to be working with somebody else, they're going to be connecting to another company. So they have a connectivity partner. That connectivity partner can be another CSP, or it can be one of the leading DCAs. Now, the DCAs, they're direct connect aggregators. They are CSPs. Basically, they're just very large CSPs.
Yep. Right.
So the connectivity partner is just somebody that you connect to, that you have terminating your messaging to. So it's kind of, who are you sending your messaging on to? That is your connectivity partner.
So if I have a software, real quick, so just to put it in like kind of real terms for anyone listening. So if, let's just say you're familiar with like a CRM, right? So if I'm a CRM provider, I'm a Salesforce, right? And people can use, they sign up for Salesforce, and there's a functionality within Salesforce that I could send text messages, right? So I'm brand A, and this is brand B. So Salesforce in this scenario would be a campaign service provider. Is that?
Yes, I mean, Salesforce is a CSP. They're a campaign service provider.
Right.
Correct.
Not a reseller.
It depends how they are connecting to you. So,
okay.
If Salesforce is a CSP, Salesforce, if they have a deal with you, Aaron, you could say that they are reselling your services. They are utilizing your connections to sell a service to their customers. So from your perspective, although on its own merits, Salesforce is a CSP, in your books, they are a customer of yours, and they are reselling your systems, your products. So they are a reseller. They're reselling your products. So anyone that has a CSP as a customer, as opposed to a direct brand, that means you have a reseller. And that means that if you are saying to that CSP, give me all the information that you would normally, if you were signed directly to TCR, give me all the information that you would normally use to sign up and do the brand and everything else, the registration and the campaign registration. I'll do it on your behalf. So it means that you, Aaron, would go into our systems as a CSP, and you would enter the brand information. And at this point, we're like, it looks like it's your brand. Then you enter the campaign registration information. And in the campaign registration information, there is a reseller attribute. And at that point, you say, the Salesforce, blah, blah, blah address, you know. And it means that when we look at it, it's like, although this came from Telgorithm, what the actual brand is not a direct brand with you, Aaron. It's a direct brand with the reseller, which is Salesforce. So it means that we can look at the correct mapping, which shows that if this brand does something wrong, it is not because you have had a miscommunication with them or you haven't had the right account management with them. It's because the reseller who actually has the direct contract may have had that miscommunication or may have had a problem with that particular brand. So it's being able to establish who actually has the direct contractual relationship with the brand. And that reseller identifier just shows who it is. Now, if Salesforce comes into the registry directly, then they come in and they enter that same brand information, the same campaign information. But what they're doing is they're choosing as a CNP, they choose you because they say, this is the company we use to send our messaging through. So instead of having to be listed as a reseller, they're just listed as a CSP. But again, the mapping shows it goes through you. So either way, utilizing either direct into TCR signing and you as a CNP, or you input all of the information on behalf of your reseller and add the reseller attribute. It just means the mapping is correct either way. We know who actually has the direct relationship with the brand and who has that contractual relationship.
Got it. I wanted to take a different spin and angle on that, more from a consumer perspective. So if I register, let's just say I'm a CSP, I'm Salesforce, and I decide I want to, I don't know, I'm going to go to Telgorithm. They're going to be my messaging provider. And I'm going to register as a reseller through them. So all the brands that I register, the CSP that those brands are tied to would be Telgorithm. They would not be tied to Salesforce. What I want to get at here is, one is from a costing perspective. If let's just say Salesforce wanted a multi-thread, right? No vendor is perfect, right? I have billions and billions of text messages going out per year. I want to be able to use 3 different messaging providers. What I'd have to then do is I'd have to create, if all those providers were resellers, I'd have to create for this one entity, one of my customers, I'd have to create 3 different brands for the same customer, versus if I'm Salesforce, I just go directly to the campaign service, to the TCR, register one brand for my customer, and then they could, when they create the campaigns, they could then multi-thread it in the campaigns there. And I'm also saving on cost because it's $4 per brand. Do I have that correct?
That's correct, yeah. And the $4 per brand, that's a one-off registration fee.
Yeah, right. That's
exactly right, yes.
Yep. But without doing that, if I just, let's just say, put all my eggs in one basket with one provider as a reseller, and then at some point in time, I either want a multi-thread or I want to switch providers, I have to re-register all of the brands all over again.
Correct.
Right? And that's can be a cost and, a headache to do all of that. So right. So is it safe to say, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Aaron, you definitely have the right track there. What we've said to people is that when you are dealing with multiple CNPs, if you have multiple paths that you use for whatever reason, maybe all of your 2FA traffic goes through one particular campaign service provider and everything else goes through another one. You got a great deal on 2FA traffic with one CSP and everything else you got a great deal on with another CSP. It means that as that CSP who runs that traffic, you can say, well, okay, let's go into TCR and let's just register it once. And we can ensure that traffic goes to CSP1 and the other traffic and the other marketing, whatever it is going to go to a different CSP. And yes, you can do that, which means that you can also track how it's all going. You can that you've got a little bit more granular insight. We'd always say to people that if you have complex paths to terminating your traffic, and it's not just through one provider, you just not sort of said, I'm just going to work with this company and that's it, then yes, it's usually better to sign directly to us because then it's easier to handle. Absolutely.
Yes, I even add that if you're a campaign service, we'll use Salesforce as an example, and even if today you have one vendor that you're fine, you may want to multi-thread in the future, so you want to think about that. And 2, also by going directly to the campaign registry, because you are truly really a campaign service provider, you get to talk to the registry. I know that you mentioned before the registry talks with everybody, but you get billed directly from the registry. And again, I'm not going to say who or what's going on, but we've heard from people that, register with some other vendor. They make them give them $40 for an additional vetting fee, and they just pocket the money because they're queuing everything up. And you have no way to know that you just got the additional throughput that they force you to pay to have. And by going directly to the registry, right, the $40 you pay is going to be invoiced to you directly from the campaign registry. So all in all, it sounds to me like it's safe to say if you want to multi-thread or even ever plan on multi-threading and kind of want to keep yourself in some ways vendor agnostic right now, you might be in contracts or you might have to port numbers over. There's just an additional layer of getting a leg in. And I know that many of these vendors are saying, look, register as a reseller because we've streamlined the process. But one of the things I do want to point out is the campaign registry, you guys actually just updated it, has an amazing RESTful API. You literally can automate and streamline the entire process directly into your application, register directly with the registry, and in that process, elect your connectivity partner, whoever that is, and have different ones and redundancies on different campaigns. Yes. And so I just wanted to kind of confirm and solidify that this is a correct line of thinking.
It is, absolutely. The key thing is there are multiple ways that you can register your information. And if you have complexity or even thinking about, as you say, changing your your connectivity partners for whatever reason, then having a registration, it also means that you are a little bit of masters of your own destiny. You ensure that the information is correct going into the registry. Sometimes multiple hands touching information can, you get fat fingering happening, right? And
totally.
So
yeah. So I wanted to wrap, because I know we're on time here, but I wanted to do 2 more things. One is, for anyone listening today, you're representing the leadership of the campaign registry. What would you like folks to know? Like, if there's a few top things that we haven't maybe discussed it, or you really wanted people to be aware of, hey, we got to get the word out on these 2 things or this thing. What would those things, what do you really want people to know?
I think one of the key things that we found is that when people are gathering information to enter into the registry, they need to think hard about when we're asking for what is the brand's EIN, corporate address, the DBA. This is information that comes from when that brand registered with the IRS. So normally they have a letter, there's a confirmation letter that comes back, and people forget that the office they're working out of is not necessarily the corporate address. It's not the address that was used to set up the company. And we need to have those accurate records to be able to validate that brand is who that brand is. And the delays that come up are sometimes because people are given incorrect information, or they're thinking that the information they have is the right information when it isn't. Mm-hmm. And so simple things like, sometimes, people say, oh, the company I work for is, the Fabulous Duck Company. But actually, that is the DBA. The actual name was the holding company XYZ, DBA, the Fabulous Duck Company.
Right.
So you need to ensure you really do know the history of your organization. And if you don't, you need to make sure that when you're asking for that information, you ask the correct people in the organization so that it's accurate. If you don't know, then sometimes just Googling your own company can actually provide a lot of insight, surprisingly.
Totally.
Thank you. That was absolutely amazing. There's so much more to talk about, but
there truly is. You got to come back, Stefan.
If we can get you back, Stefan, that would be amazing. But that was a really interesting discussion. Thank you both for sharing and asking the questions. Unfortunately, we do have to wrap up. So again, thank you. Thank you to our audience. We so appreciate you joining us today. This will be sent out to your inboxes once the recording is available, and it will be posted soon. If you have additional questions for any of us, feel free to send them via social media or email us directly. We would love to answer your questions. But Stefan, Aaron, thank you. Amazing job.
Thanks, Stefan, again. Greatly appreciated.
No problem at all.
Awesome. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.